For me, the wound is where the light enters, means being vulnerable, open, and allowing God's love to help me heal. I've sat with that truth on and off for a long time, and so did a 13th century Persian mystic, a poet, a scholar, a man who knew grief so deeply it transformed him into one of the greatest spiritual voices humanity has ever produced. His name was Jalal al-Din Rumi, and the teaching that has followed me, and perhaps you, across years and across pain is this: the wound is the place where the light enters you. Welcome to Ascend and Awaken, timeless wisdom for awakening and inner peace. But who was Rumi, and why does he still matter? Rumi was born in 1207 in what is now Afghanistan. He was a theologian, a jurist, a respected teacher, a man of considerable learning and standing in his world. And then he met Shams of Tabriz. Shams was a wandering mystic, wild, unconventional, impossible to categorize. He became Rumi's closest companion and his greatest teacher. And when Shams disappeared, suddenly, mysteriously, possibly murdered, Rumi was shattered. The wound was enormous. And out of that wound came Masnavi, over 25,000 verses of mystical poetry, often called the Quran in Persian, considered one of the greatest works of mystical literature ever written. Rumi didn't recover from his grief and then write beautiful poetry. He wrote beautiful poetry because of his grief. The wound was the doorway. Most of us spend our lives trying to avoid the wound. We manage it, we medicate it, we stay busy enough that we don't have to feel it. We build walls carefully, brick by brick, to keep the pain at a manageable distance. And Rumi says, gently, persistently, across 8 centuries, you have it backwards. The wound is not the obstacle to your healing. The wound is the path to it. Our deepest wounds are not obstacles to wholeness, but openings through which grace and wisdom pour in. Suffering cracks the ego and lets the divine light through. Think about what actually happens when something breaks you open, when a relationship ends, when the diagnosis arrives, when something you built collapses, when grief arrives and will not leave. In that moment, stripped of the comfortable stories, stripped of the ego's careful management of how life is supposed to look, something underneath becomes accessible as simply wasn't available before. A tenderness, a depth, a willingness to receive help you would have refused when things were going well. That is the light entering, not in spite of the wound, through it. Rumi wrote a poem that I want to share with you, one of his most beloved. He called it The Guest House, and it goes like this. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new guest arrives. Joy, depression, meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. Every experience, even sadness, shame, and malice, arrives as a visitor bearing a gift. The crowd of sorrows that sweeps your house empty, Rumi says, welcome them. Not because suffering is good in itself, but because the emptying, the painful clearing is making room. Room for something that couldn't enter while you were full of everything else. Here is what Rumi understood about the wound that the ego never wants to accept. The ego's entire project is self-protection, self-management, maintaining the appearance of wholeness even when everything underneath is fractured. The wound threatens that project completely, because the wound says, you are not in control. You cannot manage your way out of this. The careful construction of who you think you are has cracked open. And Rumi says, yes, exactly. That is the point. Don't turn your head. Keep looking at the bandaged place. That's where the light enters you. Don't turn away from your wound. Don't rush to cover it back up. Don't perform recovery before recovery has actually happened. Stay with it. Look at it. Because that is precisely where God is trying to get in. The crack in the ego is not failure. It is an opening. Sorrow prepares you for joy. It violently sweeps everything out of your house so that new joy can find space to enter. This is not spiritual bypassing. Rumi is not saying pretend the sorrow isn't real or skip past it toward the good part. He is saying the sorrow itself is doing something. It is working. It is preparing the ground. Where there is ruin, there is hope for a treasure. The ruined place, the broken place, the place that didn't survive intact, that is where the treasure is buried. Not despite the ruin, inside it. I want to speak directly to whoever is carrying a wound today. You know who you are. You don't need me to describe it. The thing that broke. The thing hasn't healed. The place you return to in quiet moments and feel the ache of it. Rumi is not asking you to be grateful for your pain. He is not asking you to rush past it or spiritually reframe it before you actually felt it. He is simply asking you to consider, what if this wound is not a sign that something went wrong? What if it is the very place where everything you've been asking for is trying to enter? Vulnerability, openness, God's love finding a way in. That is not weakness. That is the bravest and most sacred thing a human being can do. Thank you for spending this time with me here on Ascend and Awaken. Today's invitation is this. Find your wound. Not to dwell in it endlessly, but to stop turning away from it just for a moment and ask, quietly, honestly, what is trying to enter here? What light is finding its way through this crack? I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Has a wound in your life ever turned out to be a doorway? I read every one, and I genuinely love to know your story. If Ascend and Awaken supports your journey, consider subscribing for more reflections on timeless wisdom, spiritual awakening, and inner peace. Until next time, peace, love, and light to you on your spiritual journey.